Okay, so we're going to start with comets here. This is kind of an addition to when we are learning about the planets. This is the last section in chapter 3, and it deals with comets, asteroids, and meteoroids. So these are just other things out in space. We kind of started with the sun and worked our way out to the very edge of the galaxy with the dwarf planets, or little planets. And now we're at kind of the rest of the stuff that sits out in space that doesn't necessarily have a very specific, there's a lot of these. So for instance, comets. So comets are a loose collection of ice, dust, and small rocky particles. Alright, they have very long, narrow ellipses. If you look on the next slide, I'll kind of explain that a little bit better. But because of that, you don't see comets on a regular basis. So for instance, I was kind of telling one class, we kind of did a little bit of this with, I think, my 7A group, I'm not for sure. But Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet, I remember, came around in 1986. So I would have been around 9 years old in 1986, and I remember it being a really big deal because it comes around every 75 years or so. And like the first time I looked this up, the first time it was ever seen was 1682. It was seen again in 1758, 1835, 1910, and then again 1986. So it's only been seen by us humans here on Earth about 4 or 5 times. And it'll come again in 2062. So it's kind of a big deal when some of these kind of more major comets come around because they have these really kind of crazy orbits that don't allow them to have a really specific, like they don't come once a year. When you see a comet, it comes, not very regularly. So what is a comet? Okay, so the head, like it's listed here, is made up of a fuzzy outer layer, a coma, which is the outer, a fuzzy outer layer, which is called the coma, and then they have a solid core called the nucleus, which is like basically a big dirty snowball. So it's got a lot of ice in it, some dust and things like that, and then there's always this tail at the end that kind of causes it to stream outward. And the reason for that is because it's heated. So when the heat comes to it, you're going to really see that tail develop from it, which just makes comets so cool. If you're ever kind of able to see like a picture, if you look one up on like Google Images or something, you'll see it's like this really cool streak that goes through the atmosphere. And it's up there for a long time. So you see it for several nights because it's a long ways away and it takes a long time to get from one place to another. So it's not like it's just there for a little bit and it's gone. So when the comets do appear, it's for over a series, a couple weeks maybe, that you can see it up in the night sky. Okay, so this is what I was talking about before, that a long elliptical shape you can see here. So here, and you really see it best. Like if we were out in a further reach of the solar systems, like if we lived on Neptune or Uranus, we wouldn't necessarily see a spectacular view of the comets because, as you can see, the closer it gets to the sun, the better you can see the tail. And that's because, again, it has to heat itself up. So as it gets through, goes near to the sun, they are going to see that tail, and it's really spectacular when they do it. Now there's 2 regions of comets, which include the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud. So these are just kind of regions where you find a lot of comets in. And so again, a comet is like a big dirty snowball. It's got kind of a solid core, and then when it heats up, the gas that kind of like eludes out from the back causes a nice tail to it, which is the tail that you see. And it's because it's been heated up. Okay, so now we have asteroids. And asteroids are rocky objects that are too small and too numerous to be considered planets. And as you can see here in this picture, and I'm kind of going with my mouse right now, the asteroid belt is found between Mars and Jupiter. So there's a whole bunch of asteroids that kind of like hang out together in this direct area there between Jupiter and Mars. And sometimes those asteroids aren't necessarily in the belt, so there's a few that don't necessarily hang out in the belt like that. But for the most part, that's where you'll find them. But asteroids are fairly big pieces of rock, and they don't necessarily have they kind of have a crazy shape, as you can kind of see here in the picture of the asteroid. They've hit into different objects. I know that we've talked about this a lot in class over time if kids have asked me questions. One of the things that asteroids, an asteroid could hit Earth at some point. There's definitely a possibility that something that large could get into our atmosphere and possibly bang into Earth. In fact, that's what they think caused the dinosaur extinction. An asteroid hit into Earth and kind of covered the clouds for a long period of time, and because of that, plants stopped growing, or the food supplies for most of the plant-eating dinosaurs went away and things like that. So asteroids can inflict a lot of damage, but again, we'll know if an asteroid's coming. It's not one of those things that just comes out of nowhere, because space is so large and we're constantly looking out there. If something that big was going to hit into us, we would know with plenty of time to hopefully either prepare for it or to maybe get rid of it ourselves. All right, that's it on asteroids. Okay, so our last part of this chapter, this section here, is on meteors. The thing I love about meteors is there's 3 different names for them. They're all the same thing, but depending on where they're located, we call them different things. So if we're just looking at something out in space that we wouldn't necessarily see because they're pretty small, but if we're talking about some big chunk of rock out, ice, dust, rock, whatever, that basically is knocked off of a comet or an asteroid, it's like a much smaller piece that comes off of one of those things, that's a meteoroid. So it's out in space, just hanging out in space, orbiting around, flying through the space out there. We call that a meteoroid. It's just still out in space, meteoroid. Excuse me. Once it hits our atmosphere, and most of the time, they are going to light up, basically, or get burned up in the atmosphere. We call that a meteor. So have you ever heard of like a meteor shower, or have you ever talked about a falling star before, or something like that? That's most likely a meteor. And what's happened with that is it's entered our atmosphere, and because it's so hot in that part of the atmosphere, it burns it up. And so when we see that streak of light, we call it a meteor. If it somehow makes it through the atmosphere, and it hits all the way into Earth, then it's called a meteorite. So it's a meteorite, is a meteoroid that actually hits into Earth's surface. So meteoroids out in space. Meteors enter our atmosphere and basically get burned up there. If they make it all the way to Earth and hit Earth, we call that a meteorite. So meteorites are pretty small pieces of rock by the time they hit Earth. And they're made out of different stuff. That's how we know that they're not from Earth. And again, I couldn't tell you what the difference between that and a regular rock looks like. You'd probably have to get it tested to see if you think it's actually a meteorite. Or maybe someone you know knows the difference between rocks and meteorites, but that's about it. So there's no homework on this section, just kind of some more interesting facts about space. I'm going to get into our next chapter, which I think we've all been looking forward to. It's on stars and all of that. And there will be homework that's included with that, but just kind of a little lesson on these last 4 things from chapter 3. I also will be sending home and uploading a project that I want you to do over chapter 3, which I think is kind of fun. You can either make it on a piece of paper, a large piece of paper, or you can make a PowerPoint. And I will kind of explain those, put those directions up on PowerSchool for you, but it's kind of a fun little thing that you can do to kind of end chapter 3. Have fun!